So you're just gonna give up and wait for the inevitable? Is that what your heroes do here? Look, you guys may not know me, but all of us have powers, skills, and abilities. Where I come from, heroes use those powers to fight to make the world a better place, whether it's their world or not.
But Superman, you said he was our last best hope.
We're alive, Vic, and where there's life, there's hope. We'll go to London, fight both sides, and save the world in the process.
So this movie follows in the footsteps of Superman Batman Apocalypse in that just like that movie isn't about Superman or Batman, this movie isn't about the Justice League. It's the anniversary of the death of Barry Allen's mother, and as he's lamenting his own inability to stop the senseless crime, a whole host of his rogues gallery is breaking into the Flash Museum. After an encounter where the Flash routinely defeats his old foes, he's suddenly caught off guard and trapped. It turns out that Eobard Thawne, aka the Reverse Flash, aka Professor Zoom, was the mastermind behind the attack, and he's attached bombs to each of the rogues in the hopes of taking out most of the city with the Flash and ruining his perfect record of stopping villains. Just in the nick of time, the Justice League arrives and helps the Flash take care of the bombs, the rogues are taken in, and Zoom is arrested. Before he leaves, he warns Barry that he isn't and wasn't always fast enough to save everyone he cared about, in reference to his mother. Flash tells the League that he'll just run things off, but as he does so, he suddenly wakes up slouched over his desk. After hearing about a battle between Captain Cold and Captain Boomerang, Barry attempts to go stop them, only to trip and fall down the stairs and be met face to face with his mother, now alive and well. As it turns out, Barry has suddenly found himself in an alternate reality, dubbed by fans as the Flashpoint timeline. In it, his mother never died, he never became the Flash, the Justice League was never formed, and, as Barry comes to learn through the course of the movie, several other major changes have occurred to the universe. Bruce Wayne was the one killed on that fateful night. Thomas Wayne went on to become the Batman, and Martha Wayne went insane from the death of her son and became the Joker. Superman's spaceship didn't crash land in Kansas, but instead landed in Metropolis, leveling much of the city, where Superman was then taken in by the government to be experimented upon. Cyborg is the Secretary of Defense and is trying to convince President Obama, yes I'm serious, to make a super team to end the war permanently. Speaking of, the Atlanteans, led by Aquaman, and the Amazons, led by Wonder Woman, are at war with each other, where humanity is caught right in the middle. Much of Europe has already been destroyed by an artificial tsunami, and the United Kingdom was taken over by the Amazons as New Themyscira. Faced with this new awful reality, Barry resolves to find a way to restore his power, and then restore the timeline to normal. On his second try, he and Batman recreate the experiment that gave him his powers, though he finds that there is another speedster siphoning off of the Speed Force, preventing him from achieving the necessary power to rewrite history. In the end, all forces collide. The Flash, Cyborg, Batman, and Billy Batson, aka Captain Marvel, aka Shazam, aka Captain Thunder, try to capture or kill both Aquaman and Wonder Woman, though neither party is successful. Cyborg is all but killed by Aquaman before Superman arrives to save the day, severing Aquaman's arm, where he's then executed by Wonder Woman. Wonder Woman herself murders Captain Thunder, Batman is mortally wounded, and Barry is confronted by Professor Zoom, whom he suspected as the one responsible for rewriting history. However, Zoom informs him that it was actually Barry himself that changed the timeline. He went back and saved his mother from being murdered, causing a ripple in the timeline that affected both the past and the future, resulting in this Flashpoint universe. Thankfully, as Zoom is gloating over his victory, Batman shoots him in the head from behind at point-blank range. As Aquaman's last resort superweapon detonates to destroy the world, Batman urges Barry to fix things, giving him a letter before he does. Though wounded and badly beaten, Barry successfully enters the time stream and finds his past self in the midst of creating Flashpoint. However, he's unable to get the past Barry to listen to reason, and in the end, attacks him. Suddenly, Barry wakes up, and the world is seemingly back to normal. He goes to Batman, shares the news of his adventure, and gives him his father's letter before running off, finally coming to terms with his mother's death. So, here we are. We've made it to the New 52 era. For those that don't know, the New 52 was a company-wide relaunch of all of the DC multiverse, where all titles reverted to issue 1. This all started with the Flashpoint Paradox story arc, which was changed from its original inception as just a regular Flash story to fit into this new paradigm of creating this new reality. In much the same way, Flashpoint Paradox, the movie, aims to provide a sort of reset button, as an explanation and justification for this new shared universe that we'll be exploring in the coming weeks, starting next with Justice League War. Well, I say it does all this, but it doesn't do it very successfully. I will say that as a film, Flashpoint Paradox is really, really good, but if you're looking for any amount of logical consistency within it, you'll be sorely disappointed. Very little of what occurs in the Flashpoint Paradox makes sense if you think about it for 2 seconds, and even then, the explanations are so full of coincidences that it's a wonder that everything worked out so perfectly. Just to do some basic probability, how convenient is it that Barry reset the timeline on the exact last day that he possibly could to then fix it in the literal seconds before the world ends? Like, he could have reset it 1 day later, and then he could have waken up 1 day later in Flashpoint, and then he wouldn't have had enough time to fix everything, right? Next, how did Zoom know what Barry did to the timeline? Did he go back to see what happened himself before Barry got his powers back? If Flashpoint created a new timeline where Barry never became the Flash, how is Zoom able to exist within it when he could never have become the Reverse Flash in this new timeline? Was he outside of the timeline at the point where Barry went back and changed it? Well, no, he was in custody, so that doesn't make sense. Third, isn't it incredibly convenient how we have all of these connected characters being slightly tweaked in this new timeline just for fan service? Of course, it's Steve Trevor who Wonder Woman kills in her introduction, even though timeline-wise he should be like 80 at this point in history. And of course, Martha Wayne becomes the Joker, and such and so on and so forth. In general, this movie tries to shove way too many DC characters into the story than is necessary, and after a certain point, it becomes really distracting. Fourth, they explained that the reason that preventing Nora Allen's death affected things that happened before it, like the night Bruce Wayne's parents died as an example, as comparing changing the timeline to a sonic boom. It's like a ripple effect, which, I mean, okay, but it kinda seems like you're stretching things here.
No. It wouldn't have changed all this. It wouldn't have changed what happened before her murder. Bruce's parents, Clark's Landing.
Oh, but it did. Break the sound barrier and there's a sonic boom. You broke the time barrier, Flash. Time boom. Ripples of distortion radiated out through that point of impact, shifting everything just a tiny bit, but enough.
The most egregious example of this, though, is the ending. Yes, it's a very touching moment when Barry hands Bruce the letter from his father, but timeline-wise, at least in the logic of this movie and what it explicitly explains to us, it doesn't make any sense. This new timeline that was created is the New 52, and if this takes place that same day, which the movie implies it did, then Barry and Bruce should never have met yet, right? Unless, and maybe this is what was supposed to happen, but it was just very poorly communicated, this scene takes place sometime after the events of Justice League War, which is the New 52's Justice League creation arc. So basically, the Flash from that movie and any movies that take place chronologically between then and whatever point Flashpoint Paradox takes place, let's say that Justice League War takes place in 2012 and Flashpoint Paradox takes place in like 2015. So the Flash that the League interacts with in those 3 years is the Flash from the New 52 universe. Then the date of Flashpoint comes along, let's say 2015, and the Barry that was from the old universe who experienced Flashpoint and like the old reality that we all know, then merges with the New 52's Barry Allen. You know, does that make a little bit of sense? Because it was the same thing in Flashpoint itself. Barry didn't just suddenly pop into existence on the day that he changed the timeline. Over the course of the movie, he gains the memories of his supposedly lived life within the Flashpoint timeline. So logically, the same could be said for the New 52 universe.
There's still something I don't understand. I remember all of it. Not just what happened after I woke up there, but my whole other life. I remember every birthday cake my mother ever baked me. My room. Everything. Perhaps some kind of temporal after effect?
Or perhaps it was a gift.
Which means that the Barry Allen that we follow in the New 52 movies going forward until an arbitrary point that I hear they don't really specify, it isn't the same Barry Allen that is from this movie, right? Because it's the New 52 Barry that hasn't yet merged with the Flashpoint Barry, which was actually the Barry Allen from the original universe that is now in the New 52 universe, I think. Of course, this is all assuming that any of you followed that, which I doubt I'll follow it the day after I'm writing this. As with most time travel stories, it just doesn't make any sense. So trying to think about it and piece everything together is just distracting from the why of the time travel. That is, what does the time travel plot device serve within the story? In Flashpoint's case, it's to tell a very personal story about Barry Allen and his journey of accepting that despite his godlike powers, he won't be able to save everyone from dying, and that sometimes you're forced to choose between two bad situations, like choosing between the world ending or letting your mother be murdered. And you know what? Despite all of the logical errors and annoying fan service, I like this movie specifically because of that emotional core that it has.
I don't need help. Everything's fine now.
Mommy!
How is my little angel?
Awesome! Daddy took me out to lunch, and we had chicken wings, and I told him about the invasion drill we had at school today.
I mean, it's not like the second coming of Christ or anything, but it's still a fun superhero movie with an interesting twist on the Days of Future Past story arc. In many ways, it falls to the same storytelling traps that a lot of those types of stories fall into. It's a superhero story, there's a desolate, hellish future that we need to prevent at all costs. Oh, I wonder if they're going to win. Like, no shit, the Flash is going to win and fix everything. In that way, it becomes very hard to become invested in the events that happen within Flashpoint, but I think that this movie is very clever in its uses, aside from that flaw. Yes, we don't care about this world, its heroes, or the big war that's happening, but the events that play out within it serve a much more important function than they do in most stories. When the twist is revealed that it was Barry who changed the timeline, he's instantly put into an impossible decision, and has to make an impossible choice. Save his mother and create this hellscape, or let her die, and have things go back to something resembling normalcy. The overly dark and edgy Flashpoint timeline is there to be juxtaposed to the other choice, a deeply personal one that Barry, as evidenced by the opening morning scene at the cemetery, hasn't yet come to terms with: the death of his mother. Coming at the movie from this angle, the biggest problem then becomes that I don't think the movie focused on that aspect enough. Barry's mother, in the Flashpoint timeline, gets one scene, and that's her introduction. And then she's only briefly mentioned past that. Barry doesn't even go say goodbye to her, or tell her when he becomes the Flash again. I think that's a flaw. But if you buy into that central conceit anyway, the movie is very effective. The bad situations get worse and worse and worse as the movie goes on. Nothing works, the war will blow up the planet, and no party is willing to surrender and potentially save everyone. Pride is the downfall of both the Atlanteans and Amazons. Characters are killed off often, suddenly, and unceremoniously. In a bit of an ironic twist, the most weight given to a death is actually Zoom's, which has since become iconic in itself. It's very justifiable that Barry would want to change this world back to how it was before, but there's still that choice, one which Barry ultimately has to make. And despite my problems with the chronology of that final scene, when Batman reads his father's message, and it's once again a meeting of the minds, where first we had Barry finally learning the lesson that his mother tried to impart in him, and then we have Thomas Wayne finally being able to communicate with his son, where both versions of them thought that the other was dead. Man, it's just so good. And that line that Batman tells Barry,
You're one hell of a messenger.
man, what a great scene. Unfortunately, though, not all of the movie was good. For those that don't like it, there are brief moments where the Flash becomes a CGI model, and there are some questionable effects dotted through the film. And while it's directed competently for the most part, this is unfortunately the start of the New 52. I mean that negatively in the sense that from those I've seen and from those I've heard about, not many of the New 52 movies are good, but also because this movie and this universe marks the crash and burn of animation quality. You may have noticed it in this footage, but the faces and proportions are off. The torsos are all unreasonably large for any character meant to look even somewhat buff, and the heads are all way too small no matter which character, from Cyborg to Aquaman to Wonder Woman. And while I'll let pass some of the choppier action cuts, know that I will have a lot to say about the action animation in the next movie, so be prepared for that. For now, however, Justice League The Flashpoint Paradox is an overall solid entry into the DC animated movie catalog and a worthy start to what would become the biggest animated movie universe. Featuring an interesting new world, fun twists on old characters, and a very good, very personal story about Barry Allen, I have no trouble recommending this movie to those who haven't seen it. And in the end, all I can say is, run Barry, run.